further ado, I will hand
Thanks,
over.
Ben. So, as you mentioned, Sarah Chavez from Worldwide QA Training Program for Electronic Arts, and we're just going to go through the evolution of training from a local model to a global model, and kind of take you through some steps that we took and the wins that we got out of them. And don't hesitate to interrupt me, by the way. I don't mind that. I like a distraction, and I'll try to leave time for the end. So one of the things that really resonates with me about this graphic is that we really had similar challenges. We had the same dilemma that many companies had, where we had great teams at various locations, but they were really kind of siloed, right? We all like that word silo, because I know we all use it in a sentence. And the challenge was when you went to them and you said, hey, we should share common practices, we should share common processes, do you have any tools I can use? They'd often say things like, it's not in my objectives, you know, or it's not in my bottom line, or similar. And so that was one of the challenges that we were facing, and to some degree I think we still face today. I wanted to ask real quick, of those here today, how many work in a global company with locations outside of North America? Yeah, a lot of us, right? And it just goes beyond that, right? Of those who raised their hands, how many have global locations that operate independently with little involvement with others? Yeah, I know we do. And then even if you have a non-global company, do you have a situation where you have multiple locations maybe within the States, might not be internationally? I know you didn't raise your hands. Do you only have a single location?
Correct.
Yeah. So no matter where you're located or how many locations you have, even if you have a single location, you can still have the same situation where you have many teams that specialize in many things that don't necessarily know how to collaborate together. And so I hope you recognize that this isn't a unique challenge that EA faced, that whatever we went through is totally applicable to what you may be going through or may eventually go through. And we'll just show you how to tackle that. I had some interesting quotes that I found, and one of the things that I found that was interesting was that the IBM did a study of CEOs worldwide, and they had over 1,700 respondents. And one of the biggest takeaways that they had this huge report online, and the takeaway at the bottom basically was this, that most CEOs are seriously doubting their ability to cope with the rapidly escalating complexity of a global business environment. And that kind of struck me, because if they're worried about it as CEOs, what about the rest of us? Right? It's a challenge because we're trying to work in our different roles in this model. And what we really looked at is the fact that we need to make sure to move from the silo model that we kind of were talking about on the dilemma side and move into more of a model where we can share information and where we can share the same goals so that we don't have redundancies, where we don't have locations working on the same processes that the next team's working on or doing the same things, kind of recreating the wheel. And there was an economist that said, way back in 1983, that a company could achieve significant economies of scale by producing the same standard product at a global level. And that was a challenge to us, I think. We looked at that, and without knowing necessarily that this was back in 1983, a true concept. And we decided, how do we tackle that? How do we make sure that we're not reproducing the same work at every location? How do we make sure we were creating the same product at the global level as a team and as a complete partnership versus trying to do the exact same product at the local level across the board? And, you know, back in 1983, that was a concept. And we're still trying to apply that today. I think we're all struggling with something similar to this. Now, back at EA, to give you some context, I wanted to kind of share with you where we came from, because then we'll go to where we've gone. In our oldest model, we had, as you see, black box testing, gray box testing, and specialized testing all at each studio. So every studio would have these teams. And then there wasn't much knowledge sharing, because they're kind of each doing their own thing, not a lot of communication, not a lot of collaboration. And then we moved into a more recent model, which was where we had studios, and we had outsourced testing. And we had the outsourced testing do black box testing, but at the studios we still had black box leadership, we still had gray box testing, and we still had specialized testing. There was an increase in knowledge sharing, because at that point when you're dealing with an outsourced team, you still have to be able to make sure they're up to speed and make sure that they know your goals and your mission and your objectives. But it was more team-based. So if FIFA had an outsourced team, FIFA was talking to that outsourced team. There wasn't a really unified effort to make sure that we're communicating and training and kind of sharing common practices. So just before I get to where we're going in our current model, I thought this graphic was a good one because it will kind of share how complex this situation is for us. We have 18 locations around the world, and our goal is to make sure that we're sharing that information and that we're a true global team, not a bunch of 18 localized teams. And we have a lot of staff. And when it comes to training, in the old system, each and every dot on this map would do their own training. And that was a real challenge because you had no way to track it. You had no way to know whether it was successful. And we needed to think a little bigger. How do we go global with this? And how do we make sure that staff is sharing and that we have a true global team and we're true partners to development? So we have our newer model. And when you look at this, we haven't perfected it. You know, we're working hard on it, but this is our vision. It's to have captive EA test centers. This isn't an outsourced test center. This is EA folks that are working for EA. And they are focused on black box testing in all aspects. They're not getting orders from studio side. Remember, this is the vision. You know, it works. In some cases, it doesn't. We're growing. And we have them running test planning all the way up to finaling a game and post-final support. So the goal is to move that to the captive test centers. They also provide centralized cat lab testing and similar. So that helps these guys at the studios to focus on team-specific needs, project-specific needs, label-specific needs, versus be focused on, you know, being perfect at black box testing. So this has become really efficient for us, and it allows us to have a heck of a lot of knowledge sharing. Because in order for this to be successful, these folks have to share information and vice versa. And this is why a global training program becomes so critical if you're in a similar model or you're looking to increase your knowledge sharing. So I know somebody in here is saying, you know, why do I care? I really don't care about EA specifics. How does it apply to me? You know, what am I going to get out of this? Well, I'm going to take you through the 5 steps of creating a global training program and really revolutionizing training. And I think that what's most important about it to realize is it's not a unique situation. A lot of companies go through this where they may think, you know, I have a great training program at every location, or I got some guy who might be in charge of it. And it's really important to understand that if your training isn't evolving with your business model, then it's very likely that your business model or your business vision may fail. You have to make sure that that's the lockstep. Because training can make sure to push down the vision and push down the knowledge and information that folks know and develop them. As Ben mentioned, developing the folks and making sure that they can grow in the company and grow in the role and grow in quality assurance versus expecting external training or similar. So EA created a great game called Spore. I personally like it because you can take over the world and things. If you remember in Spore, you took a cell basically and you had 2 options. You could either eat vegetation or other cells or animals. And eventually you evolved to have a animal species, and then you evolved to have a village, and then you evolved to have a planet, so planetary level, and then intergalactic, of course. I kind of relate training and the evolution of training to a game like that, where most training programs start out at the cell level. You have some great people who are passionate about developing others, and they get together and they do their best, no doubt about it. They do their best. They want to legitimately put the time and effort. But when you have all those individual cells doing that work individually, it's not very cost efficient or effective. And so we really have to evolve that and really think into how to make it a global level approach and how to make them work together so that we can have the best output out of it. So of the 5 steps. Step 1 seems pretty easy, but it's misleading. It seems simple. Establish a training program. One of the biggest arguments you're going to hear from people is, how is that cost effective? How is it cost effective to hire somebody who knows training and put them in charge of training and or build a team around them when I could just get some random volunteers and subject matter experts to do my training? It's very cost effective. You know, all those redundancies I was talking about and all those people who are getting together and doing training on their own, you're now formalizing that. And you're allowing them to work together as a team. The training program kind of becomes the glue between all those efforts. And the training program has that great global perspective, where if somebody is working on something that's brilliant in Romania, you can identify that and bring it worldwide. Or you can also make sure vice versa. If somebody in the local level is just working on a local specific tool, that's great. And we can help you provide that training to your staff and make it the best it can be without kind of failing in the common ways that adult training does. What's important about the training program that you build is it should have subject matter experts on quality assurance. It shouldn't be, some university professors coming in teaching. I think we all know that this industry is unique. If you tried to bring in a college professor and said, hey, go teach a tester how to find bugs, it'd be pretty amusing. I think they'd freak out probably. And so the goal is to make sure you have subject matter experts who really know the topics. And you can make sure to tap them to kind of guide the content creation. And also make sure to kind of have a good judgment of what's real and what's global versus really a unique team-specific need. Step 2 is actually pretty easy. Building a communication loop. If you create a training program, you're brilliant. But if nobody knows how to find the training, or what training is available, or how to get it, or any of those things, you've kind of failed, right? You're just talking into the wind. So you need to make sure to build a communication loop. And as loop implies, it's 2 ways. You're not just talking to the staff. You need to figure out a way to get staff to talk to you. You need to make sure you can hear what training needs are occurring. If there's any burning fires, for example, mobile would say, hey, there's iOS 7? Sorry, Marietta. It was 5.5, I bet. So that would be the classic example where that's a burning fire coming up, and then you're able to identify that. If you don't have that communication loop in place, the training program can do a lot of great work, but not be very effective in the role. And what I always suggest is volunteers. Because it's going to be impossible to try to get the head count to have a dedicated trainer at every location. So what you look for is volunteers. You look for people who are just passionate about training, who love developing others, and they're willing to be that voice box for their location and their voice box for the training program back to that location. And what's great about this is if you do this right, they become the biggest sellers of the training programs, and they help to change the culture on the ground. They help to change the thinking about training in person, because it's not the training program trying to tell people, hey, there's training, it's awesome, you got to like it. It's the people at their location saying, have you checked out the training I did? I love it. Big difference. So building a communication loop and a work group, such as a training and development work group, is pretty important to that. Third is rather important and also a really daunting task, especially if you have multiple locations, or especially global locations. How do you determine how you're going to deliver this brilliant training? Are you going to hire managers or expect managers to deliver workshops on various topics like management level training, soft skills, hard skills, technical skills? Are you going to invest in a learning management system and build computer-based training and put the assets towards that? Or are you going to hire people to teach and speech? And maybe you hire a subject matter expert and they speak about the tool that you're trying to train folks on. I'll tell you right now, it's a heck of a challenge, because even if you had the most amazing, brilliant subject matter expert, if he can't train people, the material won't be effective. Because you could give him great material, or her, and if they can't teach and they don't understand the fundamentals of how to teach folks, it'll fall flat, and all that effort isn't worth it. So this is a huge one. You have to choose how you're going to deliver the training that you produce. Step 4 is a little easier in that you build your vision and roadmap. You have to determine the priorities of the training that you're developing. You have to determine, is tester training more important than management training? Is engineering training more important than compliance training? There's a lot of priorities in our organization, especially if we're trying to reach true partnership. And especially if you have multiple locations who have all high demands on the training program. So the key thing is to make sure that your folks recognize you're focusing on global training, not local training. That's a challenge, because you're going to have stakeholders all over the world who want their training to be the most important on your list. So building the vision and the roadmap. Then you also can become a true advisor on all things training. You can turn around and be the embodiment of training by building a good vision and roadmap. You can basically sell people on why they love the training program and what they're doing. But to do that, you have to have a good vision and roadmap and a good categorization of priorities. If you don't know your priorities as a training program and as senior management, how do you expect them to buy into that and understand that? So this is a pretty important step. You can choose to do a roadmap that's 2 months. You can choose to do a roadmap that's 1 year or 5 years. It's up to you. I know it's easiest to start out at, like a 3 months. What can we tackle now and what's critical now, and then kind of build out from there. Step number 5 is go do it and train. So far you've got a training program in place. You've built a worldwide collaborative communication loop through a training and development type work group. You've figured out how you're going to deliver your training, whether through an LMS, learning management system, computer-based training, or workshops. And you've figured out what your priorities are. It sounds easy, doesn't it? Just go do it and train. I think we all know that's next to impossible. But the key thing is that what we realized rather quickly is by the time you go through those first 4 steps, you've hashed all that stuff out, you figured out who your training program is and what their purpose is, you figured out the learning management system tool, you figured out how you're going to communicate to the folks. By the time you get to this step, guess what? You probably figured it out. You finally realize that you've had so many communications with staff from all levels. You've had so many communications with stakeholders that by the time you get to this point, you'll be okay. You'll actually figure out who to put in place and who to align behind the plan. And you'll learn from it. I guarantee it. When you go out there and you train, you'll learn a heck of a lot and be able to adjust course. I think the key thing is that you want to change the corporate culture to one that accepts and wants and seeks training. Not one that just sees training as kind of this thing that HR offers or similar. So you want to make it organic from inside, and that's where the training program and this process is pretty critical. Now, that is the 5 steps that EA took for the worldwide QA training program. And I wanted to share some wins because it might help you kind of see, if you followed a step like this, whether you're a local level business or global, how it can help in your organization. So the first thing, the big win, is that through our learning management system, which was one of the routes to delivery that we chose to take, we built a basic tester training. It's over 40 hours of training for new hires, and it contains everything in the kitchen sink that you need to know in order to do the job. If I have to find a bug, I know how to find a bug. If I need to enter a bug, I know how to enter a bug. If I need to know terminology like bug types, severities, what teams are working at EA, etc., that's all included in there. And so we built that course, and then we took the next step and thought, okay, it's great to build a course, but how do we make sure that our internal partners know that folks get this information? And know that folks that test their games really understand what it is to test a game, that we're not just spinning our wheels. And so we actually created a certification course to add to that. And so far we've had over 8,000 people in 2011 alone become certified EA testers. You don't start on a game until you become a certified EA tester, literally. And if you can't pass the certification test, you're let go. You're basically told, come back in 3 months, and we'll let you try again. That's meant a lot to internal partners, especially working with captive test centers and working with external teams, to say that we are guaranteeing that when people walk in this door, they have this baseline. And through those 5 steps, we were able to do that. Next one that is very important to those who like analytics. How many people like analytics? I've got my hands down if you don't notice. I'm down here. For the people who love analytics and metrics, this is rather important. In the old model, we knew nothing about what people were taking unless you took a kind of standard HR course. You could have attended a ton of training, you could have attended no training. We would have no idea because locations were not rolling up that data to the global level. So when we went out there and we would say things like, well, if you're a test lead, you must know X. That actually wasn't, we would have no idea what X is. Because globally that meant different things and different roles and different responsibilities and scopes, and etc. And so the single most important thing that this central training process brought to us, especially using a learning management system, is we know what people are getting training-wise. We know what training you've taken, if it has a quiz or related kind of checkpoint. We know whether you completed it and how you did. We have some that have more of a kind of like an exam type component, like our customer experience management, where we actually have you write about what customer experience means to you. A lot of things like that that go through the LMS. Even if you took a course that was 90% instructor-led, you would still have some component of the learning management system, so we can tell you and your managers what training you've taken. It's no small thing, especially for those who like analytics. So the next big thing that I really enjoy, and I think it's really critical for those of us in quality assurance, is that through the year, we have identified over 74 unique to QA training needs. These aren't HR training needs. These aren't development appointed training needs. These aren't things that producers are saying, hey, QA needs to learn X, although there's some of those. 74 are literally identified by quality assurance folks. 74 unique items, and the list is actually about 230 lines long, but there's 74 unique items that we can clearly say we can teach on. And that's no small thing. To be able to say that we went from a year or year and a half ago from knowing, yeah, we got training needs, we probably have management training needs, we probably have tester training needs, to having a list of 74 uniquely needs to tackle. Luckily, it means for my team and I, there's plenty of work to do. And on the flip side, it allows us to make sure that we're targeting our own folks. We're not targeting our partners, we're not targeting HR, etc. We're targeting what our guys are asking for. And to give you an idea, the way we generated that is that communication loop I talked about. You got to be talking to everybody. And I love the managers, but not managers. You got to talk to all levels. You got to talk to the first junior level staff, from the tester that just walked in the door all the way up to the directors and vice president. You got to make sure you understand the needs throughout the organization, because there's different perspectives. And I think for the managers, they've found it most beneficial that they're not being asked, hey, what's the training needs? It's not depending on the managers to say, here's the list of training needs. Of course they contribute to that, but it no longer depends on them thinking of those things. So by getting that conversation going and by changing the culture to one of training, you really quite build that loop, and it's great. Because I think it's exciting. We're really hitting folks where they need it most. So to give you an idea, this isn't just tester training. This isn't just, you know, hey, I need a tools training because I want to move into art, although I love the artists in the group. It's not specific to other departments. This is all targeted for our folks, and you can see on here, it's all levels. And this is FY13. Our FY12 roadmap was just as big. And we're hitting the big targets. You're talking soft skills, you're talking hard skills, you're talking management training, you're talking compliance training, specialized tools training, mobile training. There's a lot going on, and the only way we got here is those 5 steps. That was the only way that we could get to this point. That on a global level, we can tackle these items that everybody was begging for and really focus in on the priorities. So I could go on and on about training. You know me. If you don't, feel free to call me. But I love training. I talk about training all day long. It's obviously my job. I'm pretty good at it, but as one of our senior former directors once said, if I was given a guitar and told to play it as my job, I'd get pretty good at it too. So I try to remember that. But you know, I'd be interested in using whatever time, and I'm sure Ben will tell us what we have, to talk about what training is happening in your companies and any questions about the deck. How long do we have, Ben?
2 questions, and you have like a minute. Sorry.
Okay, quickly.
So I just have a question because I've done training in the past at some of the other companies I worked at, and when I do, we try and do a structure where you do a pre-test, so it kind of gives them an idea of what they're going to get trained on. Then you do the training. Then we usually do like a little game just to kind of break things up and have a little fun and give out prizes. Yeah. And then we do a post-test, and we see how much they actually picked up. Right. So the 2 questions I had is, one, when you start getting to the spot where you have hundreds and hundreds of devs, obviously you can't just like be doing games and giving out prizes and stuff every single time. Right. So how do you get that? How do you get the funding for your budget? And then the second related question was, when you do stuff like the testing and the quizzes and the checkpoints that you're talking about and how they're picking up, does that ever actually affect hiring, firing, movement up or down, etc. at EA? So to the first question, we have gone with at least basic tester training, if that's what you're speaking about specifically. We have gone to a learning management system-based entire course. So that isn't requiring interaction. The reason we had to do that was because I mentioned budget before. Trying to justify at every single location that, hey, you're going to have to use one of your leads or project leads or senior testers or whatever.
and you're going to have to use them a week, a month to train new testers. It was just impossible. And there was a lot of pushback. So at a minimum, staff go through the computer-based training plus test, and then onboarding occurs by the project or by the location. Everybody does it a little different. We're evolving that. I think there's better ways to handle that, and we're pushing out like an interactive game that they can use to practice what they're learning, but it's an evolution. And in general, like the workshops and similar, we depend on the locations to provide some of the tchotchkes, as I would say, to kind of make that as interactive as possible. And to the second question, for the tester training, certainly that affects whether you get hired or fired or whatever, or we call it nicely let go. So that does affect that. In terms of the more senior staff, it's up to the managers what to do with that. They have included training as an objective in all the staff members' yearly objectives. So if they're not completing training, that does come back to them in their performance review or their mid-year review. So it does loop back somehow. Yeah?
You mentioned training and black box testing, and you mentioned gray box testing at one point. Does that gray box testing include test automation or any of those kind of things?
Yeah, to some degree. Now, test automation is largely done by our software QA engineering group, basically, SQA. I hate to use acronyms because I know they're not universal. So that's largely used by or done by them. And then we have a team in Hyderabad who focuses on that. So it's not necessarily part of that model in that you would still have that offshore. You wouldn't require every studio to be doing their own automation. They basically assign it to Hyderabad, who does it for them. So it's efficient, but it's not necessarily something that we're training on because they're so focused on that they built their own expertise. Does that kind of help?
Okay, cool.
Cut off?
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.